OShow. And when you want to get clear what's going on here, it's on the OShow. If you like to stay in the know, tune yourself into the OShow. It's the OShow. Laura Babcock's the OShow.
Welcome to the OShow, Canada's conversation on the issues we have in common, some solutions, and of course, bold opinion. And nothing could be more bold than the opinion of the guest we've got this week. We all know him, probably have an opinion about him. It's Charlie Angus. And we're going to pick up on the conversation that Kathleen Wynne and I ended on around what's happening with Canadian democracy. And he has a lot to say and a lot that he's doing about it. So Charlie Angus is going to join us in just a minute. But here's a couple of other things that we're watching for you on the OShow. We're going to have Brittle Star on. He was reacting in a hilarious video to the newest weird thing out of politics from the Conservative Party nationally, and that is that Tim Hortons coffee cup lids have become woke. We'll have to talk to Brittle Star about his take on where things are in this country. Also coming up on the OShow, I wanted to interview somebody who I used to debate politics with a long time ago, and that's Linwood Barclay. He is, of course, now a celebrated international fiction author. He's got a new book and some strong opinions about book banning and a whole lot of other things. So we're going to have Linwood Barclay joining the conversation as well. Okay, let's talk to Charlie Angus. He's been in the House of Commons in Ottawa for 20 years, representing the North in Ontario. He's punk. He's punk rock from the get, not just in his music and his taste, but also in his politics. Nothing is more evidence of that than his recent go at Big Oil and causing quite a stir there about how they advertise. Kind of brings back the big tobacco days. We'll see whether or not he can make progress on that. And also, Charlie Angus is up there fighting for the extending of some benefits for people who are in homelessness, an issue that, you know, here on the pod, we care passionately about. And so it's such a thrill to invite you to the OShow for the first time. Charlie Angus, welcome to the pod.
Thanks so much for having me on.
When I read your op-ed in the Tyee out of Vancouver, I thought, you know, what a great conversation to follow up on what Kathleen and I were talking about and to add some new layers to, because you use the term politics of intimidation, Charlie, and we have seen recently an MP from another party, the Liberal Party, decide she's going to step down because she's from our area, actually, where I'm here in the GTA, and she doesn't feel safe anymore, which is nuts, right? And we're seeing the threats that you've been getting and you chronicled in the op-ed. And I've seen you talk about before in terms of things that you think the RCMP can be doing. So, Charlie, what the hell is happening in Canada? Are we freaking out and overstating things here on the pod, or are we in a seriously different political landscape than we have been in your 20 years?
No, we are in a completely different political landscape. You know, I represent blue-collar Northern Ontario. I've gone into meetings about the gun registry where lots of guys were shouting at me. Never thought twice about walking in there. I remember one time the Teamsters sent big guys with jackets because they thought I would need help. And I was like, hey, if I can't walk into a big union hall unless I need support, then I shouldn't be in this job. And it was because, yeah, people get passionate. Yeah. People get angry about issues, but we could always find common ground. And that to me was always a factor. It's like, if you're a politician, you've got to be willing to go to the blockade, to the barricade, to walk out and to talk to people. But what we're dealing with is a very, very different beast. And I think one of the things I decided to do in the last 3 years as this beast has started to really rear its head is to speak up, because I know a lot of politicians who really don't want to draw any more attention to themselves. I've been surprised at the politicians I've talked to who faced serious death threats, who, you know, are just like quiet, ordinary MPs. You might not even know their name, and yet they're being threatened. Their families are being threatened. So I think we need to unpack it and try and figure out what this is and also how it's being exploited. And that was the whole point of my article, The Politics of Intimidation. It's gone beyond just sort of irrational rage factor politics of the online world to what I believe is a very important tool in the political toolbox of the Conservative Party, which is the politics of intimidation.
Well, and I want to unpack that with you because, coming from my bias here is a former journalist, and my partner of 25 years is a camera person nationally and has seen a tremendous difference in the way that the media has been treated, right? And we've seen some people who spoke about vaccines and vaccine mandates in the media get a lot of harassment and threats during the pandemic. And now, Charlie, when I see what's happening with MPs, I also have seen it at the MPP level and locally. There are local councillors who were defending a temporary structure for people who are experiencing homelessness in Hamilton, who got death threats, who had to shut down a public meeting because they were warned by the police that they shouldn't attend. The mayor got death threats. So, I mean, it's at all three levels of Canadian politics. And, I've never been one to believe that there isn't partisan politics at all three levels. I will get a lot of crap for doing this show with you, but I get crap anytime that I talk about Ford or Poilievre. I don't get crap when I criticize Trudeau. I don't get crap when I go after Jagmeet. I feel very much as though this is a right-wing phenomenon, not to say that there are not people who have vile and extreme views on the far left of the agenda, and threats of all kinds of intimidation and violence are disgusting, and I repudiate them right here, right now, Charlie. I have seen, though, in my personal experience, a rise of threats and vitriol and going after my family from people who are supporting right-wing politicians in this country. So I want to pick up on that nuance, because in your op-ed, you said, is the rhetoric of the politicians, the right-wing politicians, Poilievre in the case you cited, is that causing these, or are people, just picking up? So is it causal? Is it just anger? I mean, how do you unpack that? What is the causality here?
That's a really important question. And I think one of the failures that we've seen in sort of the Canadian media political landscape is that, the usual, well, they all do it. Well, everybody's got a problem. And I feel like that doesn't cut it. It doesn't make sense. I've never had death threats from Liberals in my riding because they didn't like something. I would unpack it in a couple of ways. I think one is that we see the Steve Bannon effect and how intimidation is used now by the far right across Europe, across the United States. So it's a very much a created feature now, particularly of American politics. I think what had happened in Canada, we saw it during COVID by the third lockdown. At that point, I began, because I was staying really in touch with people in my riding. People could call me, people who have my home number, talking people through, reassuring them. By that third wave, the people who we were dealing with, who were getting more paranoid and freaked out, had gone down the rabbit hole. So there's suddenly this World Economic Forum stuff, George Soros, like just crazy ass stuff. And I couldn't quite get my head around it. But what I began to quickly realize is that if you start to validate conspiracy, you create this dangerous echo chamber. My naivety in Canadian politics and during COVID was that we all had a job to get people through to the other side. We all had to step up. We all, across party lines, needed to get people to safety and mental health safety. But that didn't happen. So my first serious threats came when I called out Colin Carey for using his platform in Parliament to go after the WEF. And like within minutes, I was getting harassed, threatened. It really shocked me. We never had death threats before. What I'm seeing now, cut to the chase, is that what had been initially sort of a lot of that online conspiracy rage stuff of COVID now is very much tied to the language of the Conservatives. It's axe attacks. It's all like the slogans, the bumper sticker slogans that Poilievre uses. They're not talking policy. This is propaganda. This is like the classic propaganda tool of repeating slogans again and again and again, and all his people repeating slogans. And then what amplifies it is that all of them are swinging for the algorithms. So you see really ridiculous, stupid videos like Michelle Ferrari in her bathtub, or when she broke into the washrooms in Parliament, exposing how woke the men's washrooms had become. Like, you think it's ridiculous and stupid, but in order to keep the rage machine going, you have to feed them outrage. And so what the Conservatives have learned is that this is a very effective tool for channeling what had been, I think, incoherent rage into political rage that works. And then the intimidation happens in that they keep the pressure on their political opponents all the time. So political opponents are now seriously thinking twice about advertising where they're going to be, announcing public meetings, even having their doors unlocked at their offices. Well, that really then separates us from our constituents, and that's the danger to democracy.
Well, we certainly remember that moment with Chrystia Freeland coming out of the elevator out in Alberta, and that intimidation kind of in her face, this boldness, right? That we can get this close and we can be this intimidating. And what that does is it has the, I think, the desired effect is that it chases people out of politics, right? It makes people not speak up. It makes people afraid to weigh in at a barbecue when they're hearing other people say some kind of crazy shit. And they're saying, you know what? I'm not getting in on this thing. My neighborhood is flush with F Trudeau flags. And people have a right to their opinions and a right to, their flags. But it's the effect it has, Charlie, of making people say, you know what, I'm out. I don't want to talk about politics.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to get engaged in politics. I don't want to go to my local school board meetings. I don't want to have political discussions with my friends. It basically tamps down our democratic discussion. And if you read, as I'm sure you have, there's been much said about it, the authoritarian playbook going around the world. And Applebaum, established journalist, just did a thing about how they are doing it and what tools that they're using and copying and amplifying, and this inchoate rage you're talking about and channeling it. I mean, this is something that's happening. It's a global phenomenon. It's not paranoia to call it out. It's not Trump derangement syndrome or whatever they'll call us for this conversation. I'm not partisan. You're NDP. I just had on a liberal premier. I mean, it doesn't matter what your political stripe is or what your beliefs even are, as long as you're not promoting violence and hate. We should be able, should we not, Charlie, to have conversations, robust debates, nuanced discussions, even about foreign affairs, without feeling as though we are going to be threatened and our families are going to be targeted. I mean, or are we just going to cede this and give up what is effectively an open democracy?
Well, I think what really struck me is how much it's being weaponized, the rage. I think the number of people who are seriously looking to threaten me at a public event are very, very tiny, but they have this enormous sense of entitlement, that their views matter more than other people. And I remember during Convoy, there was I was actually writing about how shocked I was at the threats that journalists were getting. Mm-hmm. And I remember, Grandma from Kapuskasing wrote on my Facebook page and said, well, if they didn't lie, they wouldn't need to be threatened. It's like, wow, that's brown shirt stuff. I remember one time I posted some of the horrific death threats that I actually record them. And sometimes I post them so people can hear what hate sounds like. And a woman wrote to me and she said, I feel really bad for you and your family, but if you listen to us, you wouldn't be getting threatened. But that is the outsized sense of entitlement. If you did what we wanted you to, we wouldn't have to threaten you and your family. But what's concerning to me is that I take on Pierre Poilievre in the House all the time. I ridicule him for never having had a real job. I make fun of his Mr. Working Class when he's living in the 19-room mansion. And when I do that, my inbox immediately fills up with threats. It's almost to the minute. In fact, one of the times I did, they had already got a meme sent into my region. Like, by the time I sat down, their media machine was pumping that, and so it wasn't just the amorphous, crazy hate clouds. They were actually people that identified as voters of mine, saying, you're done, we're finished with you, we hate you, you're a loser, this constant pressure. And so you see cause effect. So when I called out Pierre Poilievre and his refusal to distance himself from Alex Jones, my daughter's photos were online within the hour with where they worked, saying they were coming after me and my family. And so am I going to say Pierre Poilievre did that? No. But they're blurring the lines between the extremists, like that's why he visited the Aguilon encampment. That's why he's not going to distance himself from Alex Jones, because it is this metastasizing petri dish of hate that they don't want that thing to blow up in their face. But the problem is it's going to blow up in the face. It's going to blow up democracy. And it does require people like Aaron O'Toole, who spoke really profoundly about the danger of swinging for the algorithms, before they threw him under the bus and drove over him. But those voices need to be heard, and we're not hearing that from Pierre Poilievre. This is his style of politics.
Well, what's deeply concerning about everything you've said is that we have seen this pattern for the last 6 years, if you follow American politics as I do. And I think many Canadians should. We have the longest undefended border in the world with the US, and we are 180 days or so away from potentially the end of their great experiment of democracy with that election, and the potential for Donald Trump and his plan for 2025, which is well published. I mean, this is not conspiracy stuff. This has been well reported on and well discussed and owned by the likes of the people that you were mentioning before. They have a plan. They have a plan for authoritarianism. And what you mentioned, brown shirts earlier, people are always scared about using the word fascism. No, we shouldn't be scared of it. It is a phenomenon. It is a political strategy. It's been used to great harm in the world. And many of us have forgotten how it builds and where it comes from and what it looks like when it comes. And I heard this great journalist the other day in the US talking about the fact that what is it going to, in fact, Dean Blundell and I had this conversation on his pod. What is it going to look like when it comes to Canada? It won't look like the Christo-fascism we're seeing in the US. We're a different country than them. It's not going to look like what we thought we saw in Germany in the 1930s. It's going to look like people being intimidated and threatened, and the use and the permission of violence in politics, right? Where you're able to say, I wouldn't threaten to hurt you and your family if you just listened and did what we said. That is what it looks like. And so I'm not calling Poilievre a fascist. I'm not calling anyone else a fascist, but I am calling on Canadians to not be so gentle that we are afraid to cite the threat that is in front of us. You can argue with me 6 ways from Sunday. I think that if you weren't willing to take the vaccine and when you could protect other people and get us out of those lockdowns sooner, I think that's a selfish thing. Nobody wanted to take it. We had to. It was a public health emergency. You can hate me all day long for that position, and I'm sure many people do. But it doesn't mean that you should threaten me because of it. And I didn't like the trucker occupation honking their horns and driving the people of Ottawa nuts. I called them out for that. Fine. You can call me a sheeple. You can call me all these other names, but you don't get to threaten violence. And I think, I hate to quote, a Republican that I do not respect, Mitch McConnell, but Charlie, he said, free speech gives you the freedom to speak, but not to use it to harm other people. So we need to call this out. And correct me if I'm wrong, but didn't the RCMP just come out in the last couple of days, Charlie, saying, there's such a rise in threats to members of parliament that we need to have new mechanisms? Are you supporting a registry, new laws? I mean, what are the fixes to this? I mean, identifying the issue, I'm from PR, right? Identifying the issue is half the battle. You got to identify it, call it, name it. But then you got to move to solution-based thinking, which I always try to do on this pod. So what are the solutions in your mind with all of your experience?
Well, I think it's really important that we start to look at solutions, because I feel that someone is going to get hurt. My experience, I'm just waiting on a subpoena to go to court to deal with a guy who threatened me with death. I've been in court other times. And I have had to negotiate those spaces by myself. It's okay, I'm a member of parliament, but it's pretty freaky when you're getting seriously threatened and police are like, well, as long as he doesn't come to your house, you should be okay. The House of Commons, I'm sorry, they're just the support is almost nil. So, you know, it's up to I had to deal with my Crown prosecutors. We had to, you know, find about restraining orders. But I think part of the pressure is that if I get an online threat, and I've had online threats from people who their picture up was with their kid and their company truck was in the picture, and you pass that on, and then they say, well, go to your local police and make a complaint. Well, my local police in Kirkland Lake are 8-person detachment dealing with opioids. They're not equipped to deal with these online threats of violence. So, you know, a simple thing would be if the RCMP had a list of people who make threats and just called them and said, hey, you know what, that's really not cool. I think the vast majority of people who make threats have no intention of ever following through. But what they do is they create a climate where it becomes okay to do that. I certainly know on Wellington Street outside of Parliament, we have to cross a gauntlet many times. And I've been basically swarmed. And you're on your own. I mean, God help asking the Ottawa police to come, right? I mean, if I had my fuck Trudeau flag, I'm sure the Ottawa police would be walking me past and making sure I'm safe. But
they'd be bringing you a hot tub. They'd be bringing you a hot tub and fuel. Come on.
Where's my hot tub? I know. But, you know, I mean, the issue is that what does fascism look like in our country? It's when someone like Pam Damoff says, I'm afraid for my life and I'm not going to serve this country. You know, I like Pam and I fought hard with Pam. I mean, nobody's ever going to accuse me of being nonpartisan. I'm a partisan guy. I think politics should be partisan. I think politics shouldn't be this quiet little library of respect. I think it disrespects democracy by, you know, all of us sitting there meekly and politely and listening to bullshit answers. But Pam is a dedicated servant to the people of Canada. And democracy is a much diminished place where someone like her feels her life is threatened trying to serve her community. That's the question that we have to face. And I think we have to say, is that what we want in Canada? When did that become normalized in Canada? Because that's not the Canada I know. That's not the Canada I've been in for 20 some years. I love door knocking. I love talking with conservatives and liberals. I used to go into the coffee shop and all the old guys would be sitting there and I'd say, well, you know, gentlemen, argue all you want. I don't care what party you vote for as long as you vote for me. And then they'd all laugh and say, damn it, you're right, or whatever. But these people don't want those conversations. You know, I mean, these are the people who say, yeah, come on my street and I'll sick my dogs on you.
It's everywhere, right? It's not just up north. It's not just rural communities. The person you're talking about who's leaving politics because she's afraid is in a pretty nice area of the GTA. I used to run a chamber of commerce near there, right? This is not something that we can isolate and say, well, it's just a certain kind of Canadians. I think Canadians are empowered by the anonymity online and the freedom. I think they get revved up. As I said in my op-ed in the Star, there's a lot of real pain in this country. We are bruised for sure, but we're not broken yet. And we don't need to break. What we need to do, in my opinion, is get those laws in place, have this conversation honestly and often, right? Demand that there is an awareness of this threat and make sure that we are protecting our elections from foreign interference and domestic. Make sure that our politicians are repudiating these forces.
I think if we're going to represent people, we also have to represent democracy. You know, there's things I've trashed Trudeau on a million things. You know, I launched the investigation on his trip to Billionaires Island. That was my request. You know, the Wee Brothers charity scandal. I did all that. You know, but when to accuse the Prime Minister of selling crack cocaine to kids in schoolyards and having pregnant mothers being threatened in hospitals because of Justin Trudeau by the leader of the Conservative Party is so outrageous, but it also then it's again amping up. It's amping up the rage factor. So people who listen to him are thinking, my God, this man is evil incarnate. We have to stop him. Someone is going to get hurt. If we have to have also some obligation on our rhetoric. And I remember when Jack Layton accused Paul Martin back in his first election that Paul Martin's abandonment of public housing policy led to deaths in the streets of Toronto. That was true. I mean, without those housing, people did die. And I remember being at those marches, but there was such a media outcry that was considered so far over the line, and Jack had to apologize. And it's like what Pierre Poilievre, I mean, the Conservatives shouted the Liberal government and Liberal members and NDP that we're the ones who are killing people in the opioid crisis. We're responsible for it. This is playing on people's fear, their rawness, and it's strictly for exploited purposes. So, we have to pull back the rhetoric a little bit, but we have to say that it is not cool for someone to threaten anybody doing their job. And you know what? It's not just the elected officials. I've dealt with, people who work for small towns who are now getting death threats online on Facebook. And you go to the local Facebook site, and it's like, come on, guys. People are being threatened with death here because they work for the town, that level of entitlement has to be dealt with.
Well, I love that you call it entitlement, because I think that reframes it in a really interesting way, because we've always heard it as grievance, right? Legitimate grievance because of disruptions in the economy and AI and inflation and all the pain points I start my op-ed with.
Yeah.
There's a lot of grievance out there, but it's an entitlement to think that if people don't listen to what you're saying and bend a knee to that, then they are responsible for the intimidation and the threats that you're about to pile and heap on them. So, Charlie, I want to thank you so much for your first time on the OShow. We try very hard here not to shy away from any topic, because that's what democracy is about. We're allowed to have these discussions and disagree. And I'm sure I've said something about your politics probably in the past. I have no idea.
No doubt. If you hadn't, I'd feel I failed.
Anything you want to leave with our audience? I hope we can have you back on the pod, Charlie. And I of course wish you well in your life after you retire, but I have a feeling you're going to stay vocal. Is there anything you want to leave our audience with before we say goodbye today?
Well, the only thing that I think what worries me is that I've always seen politics as a great adventure, because I love people. I love people. I love their stories. I'm a storyteller. I'm a musician telling stories, being part of people's lives. And again, this sense of these people who are out to ruin this for all of us, to ruin our experience, to make us feel that, yeah, your MP, you never know, hear from him. Well, you don't hear from him or her because she doesn't want to say where she's going to be, because she doesn't want the threats. They're ruining the experience of, it's not democracy, it's Canadian democracy, which I think is a different beast altogether. I got my picture taken with Joe Clark recently. I was thrilled. Joe Clark said, of course, Charlie, I'll get my picture taken with you. I mean, like Joe Clark, me, wow. I felt like I called my mom. She's not a Tory. She was thrilled. Like, that's Canadian democracy, and it's worth fighting for, and it's worth protecting from toxicity and stupidity and the rage farm.
I love that. And, I have Brittle Star coming up on the next pod. I have no idea what his politics are, but his woke Tim Hortons coffee cup satire, it's one of the funniest things I've ever seen. So I'm like,
and that's the stupidity of playing for the algorithms. It's like, come on. And we're in a world where Charles Adler is now my political guide. I thought, how did that happen? Charles Adler is like, I follow him religiously. I was like, is this the only man speaking up right now? Like,
thank you for being on the program.
Thank you so much for having me.
I got to have Charles Adler on now. Thank you so much.
Tell him I follow him.
Yeah, okay. I will. And he'll be watching, I'm sure. And be safe, you and your family. And let's get some serious measures in place, both civilly in our discussion and legally in our laws, so that we can protect people and protect our Canadian democracy. Thank you so much, Charlie.
Yes. Thanks so much. Okay, take care.
When you care about current affairs, it's on the OShow. And when you want to get clear what's going on here, it's on the OShow. If you like to stay in the know, tune yourself into the OShow. It's the OShow. Laura Babcock's the OShow. With a lot of great guests, she puts them to the test on the OShow. There's no doubt they'll be calling them out on the OShow. Stand for something or fall for it all. Ontario, hear the call of the OShow. It's a podcast, the OShow. Laura Babcock's the OShow. Stay informed with the OShow.